Hey everyone, quickly before we get into the video, I want to apologize for the lower quality on the video footage because I didn't have any gameplay recorded where I went into expert roulette without a healer, so I ended up taking the footage from an old stream that I did, and then there's some loss on quality of the video footage, so hopefully you guys don't mind it too much. So, Warrior. I've been wanting to make this video for a little while now, but I decided to hold off on doing so because I wanted to see if they were going to make any significant changes to the job in patch 6.1, because in the live letter they did mention some changes were planned for Warrior and a lot of people immediately assumed that it was going to be for their healing. However, the healing was unchanged and instead they made some changes to inner release and their AoE combo. So instead of just talking about the healing aspect of Warrior, as I was planning to do before, I'll also talk about the changes and how they affected the job because they were quite positive in my opinion. So let's start with the changes so that you know what is new with Warrior. Overpowered was changed from being a cone attack into being a normal circle attack. Feels really weird after having played with a cone for like 6 years at this point, but it makes sense that they did this. They did the same for Samurai this patch as well, and it does make things a bit easier to pull mobs together in a dungeon. I did kinda like having to aim myself to try and hit everything with the cone, but I also don't really mind that it's a normal circle now, because I just don't really care that much about dungeons, and it doesn't really change anything outside of dungeon gameplay. The inner release change, however, I am a really big fan of for multiple reasons. So they did two things. One, the stacks that allow you to use a free direct hit crit fell cleave or decimate are now separated from the knockback immunity buff that you would get. Now I know that this didn't really see a lot of use in most cases, but for our current Savage tier for example, it comes in very useful during Hesperos phase 1, so you can now enjoy the full 15 seconds of knockback immunity without needing to sit on your inner release stacks. The second thing they did was make it work like Delirium does for Dark Knight. Inner release stacks will now only be consumed when using Fell Cleave or Decimate. That means that you can now use other GCDs while inner release is active without eating away at the stacks. Again, not a lot of times where you would do this, but again, Hesperos phase 1 would have some scenarios where this comes in handy, where you can now use a Tomahawk instead of just not using any GCDs at all. And for bosses that have awkward phase timers, this can also be really useful. If I were to look back at Shiva Savage, just as an example, you wanted to open up with your burst immediately, because that phase 1 duration had such awkward timing. But for Warrior, you needed to use 4 GCDs before you could activate Inner Release, the Storm's Eye combo to get your damage buff, and an Inner Chaos to get your Infuriate going. However, because these GCDs don't take away stacks anymore, you can now use your Inner Release early, still do that Storm's Eye combo to get your buff, and the Inner Chaos to get Infuriate going without losing out on anything. And this Infuriate during Inner Release is also kinda neat, because it would allow for you to get an extra Inner Chaos under raid buffs in certain circumstances. So I'm quite a big fan of this change. You could argue that it takes away some of the thinking that you had to do in terms of your Infuriate timer, but honestly, Warrior is already brain dead as it is, so this doesn't really change that much in terms of difficulty. So that does it for the changes to Warrior that happened in this patch. Let's then talk about the thing that people were expecting to get changed but didn't, the healing. If you were to ask most people, then they will tell you that Warrior's healing is overpowered, and I would agree with them to some extent. In dungeons, Warrior's healing is a bit ridiculous, as you can see from the gameplay in the background, but on a normal boss fight, it's not that much crazier than what a Gunbreaker or a Paladin can do, especially now because Paladin received some nice buffs to their healing as well, and I'm not talking about Clemency, they gained a lot of extra healing on their normal AoE and single target rotation. So I think that Warrior is completely fine when it comes down to single target scenarios. I will agree that Warrior is a bit too strong in dungeons though. But then again, it's also a dungeon, and I don't really care that some classes are stronger in dungeons than others, because again, it's a dungeon. My opinion on that might change later this expansion once we get our Criterion dungeons, because from what I understand those are supposed to be some harder dungeons, and if they are, then I would like there to be a more even playing field, and not that Warrior is just the only tank that people want because of how strong its healing is in an AoE scenario. But only time will tell on that one. And even then, if they really wanted to nerf Warrior's dungeon healing potential, then they could just rework it like how Paladin's healing work. Paladin just heals when they press their GCD, doesn't matter if they hit one target or 10. Could easily do the same thing for warrior, because as I said before, I think their healing on single target is more than fine the way it is. Or maybe add a cap to how many enemies that you can lifesteal off of, because otherwise it would be a lot weaker when compared to Paladin, because Paladin has a lot of small heals over a longer period of time, whereas warrior has 3 strong heals in a very short period of time. So I can see that still being kind of okay. But in the current state of the game, where we don't have these criteria on dungeons yet, I don't really mind warrior being a bit ridiculous in dungeons. On the contrary, I actually think it's a lot of fun, because it allows you to do stupid things like this, where you're running expert with 3 DPS jobs and you make the dungeon run go a fair bit faster like that. But that's just my opinion on it, and I might be a bit biased, as I've been a warrior fan pretty much since I started playing the game some 6 or so years ago, so I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about this. Do you like the changes that have happened in 6.1, and what do you think about the healing potential that warrior has? And if you were to change it, what would you do about it? Let me know down below. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my Patreons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.